Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be taking a look at some true Blizzard horror stories. In these Blizzard horror stories we will meet people whose lives were changed forever after what happened. If you think you could have survived, let me know how in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Now let's get started with Blizzard horror story number 1. The blizzard came in fast and unforgiving, a wall of white fury that devoured the New Jersey skyline. Evelyn had seen the warnings on her phone earlier in the day, but she had brushed them off. Storms were part of January, nothing unusual about that. But this storm was different. By the time she realized the severity, it was too late to turn back. Evelyn was on a winding back road, one of those narrow stretches flanked by skeletal trees that seemed to claw at the darkening sky. The snow fell in thick, smothering sheets, and the wipers of her old Subaru struggled to keep up. Her headlights barely pierced the swirling white void ahead. Panic gnawed at the edges of her mind. She squinted at the GPS on her dashboard, but it was as lost as she was. The signal had vanished miles ago, and the screen displayed nothing but a frozen map. She'd intended to take a shortcut to her friend's cabin, a last-minute New Year's getaway in the Pine Barrens. But now she was trapped in the middle of nowhere, with the wind howling like a feral beast. The car sputtered, and Evelyn's stomach dropped. No, 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 she muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. The gas gauge had been dipping dangerously low, but she'd convinced herself she had enough to make it. Now, as the engine coughed one last time and died, her hope flickered out with it. The silence was deafening, the kind that presses on your chest and makes you feel like you're underwater. Outside, the blizzard raged on, the wind's banshee wails seeping through the cracks of the car. Evelyn reached for her phone, praying for a miracle. No signal. She glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Midnight was hours away, but it already felt like the end of the world. She couldn't stay in the car. The cold would seep in, and hypothermia would claim her before morning. Her eyes darted to the forest beyond the windshield, the twisted trees standing like silent sentinels. She had no choice but to seek shelter. Bundling up in every layer she had, Evelyn stepped into the storm. The wind was a living thing, slamming into her with icy claws. Snow clung to her boots, making each step an ordeal. She stumbled forward, head down, until she saw it, a faint glow in the distance. A house, a cabin, she couldn't tell, but the light was her only lifeline. She trudged toward it, heart pounding with desperate hope. As she drew closer, the outline of a small, ramshackle building emerged from the snow. It was old, its wooden walls weathered and warped, but it was shelter. The door creaked ominously as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was marginally warmer, and a dim lantern flickered on a table. The place was eerily silent, save for the moaning wind outside. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room. There was no sign of anyone, but the lantern suggested someone had been here recently. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. Only the wind answered. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The walls were lined with shelves cluttered with strange items, jars of what looked like preserved animal parts, dusty books with incomprehensible titles, and odd symbols carved into the wood. Unease prickled at her skin, but she was too cold and exhausted to care. She found a tattered blanket on a chair and wrapped it around herself, sinking onto the floor by the lantern. As she warmed her hands, she noticed something odd. The storm outside seemed quieter now, almost as if the house was muffling it. The silence was oppressive. Then she heard it, a faint scraping sound, like nails on wood. Her breath hitched. It was coming from above. "Hello," she said again, louder this time. The scraping stopped. Evelyn's eyes darted to the ceiling. The floorboards above her creaked softly, as if someone was shifting their weight. She stood, her pulse hammering in her ears. Is someone there? No answer. The silence stretched, taut and menacing. Then came a new sound, slow, deliberate footsteps, descending the stairs at the far end of the room. Evelyn backed away, her heart in her throat. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by a tattered hood. In its hand, it clutched something long and sharp, a rusted blade. Evelyn's blood ran cold. You shouldn't have come here, the figure rasped, its voice like wind through dead leaves. I didn't mean to, Evelyn stammered, her back pressing against the wall. I got lost. The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words. Then it stepped closer. Evelyn's instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like lead. Suddenly, the lantern flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows across the room. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural chill. The figure stopped, its hood falling back to reveal a face, or what was left of one. The skin was pallid and stretched tight over bone, the eyes sunk in pits of darkness, its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. You'll stay, it hissed. You'll keep us warm. The words made no sense, but their malice was unmistakable. Evelyn's paralysis broke. She bolted for the door, but the wind slammed it shut before she could reach it. The figure moved faster than should have been possible, blocking her path. Its bony hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with inhuman strength. The lantern's light died, plunging the room into darkness. Evelyn screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the storm outside. The last thing she felt was the searing cold of the figure's touch. And then nothing. When search parties found her car days later, there was no trace of Evelyn. The storm had wiped away all tracks, all signs of her existence. Locals spoke in hushed tones about the cursed cabin in the woods, a place that welcomed lost souls and never let them leave. And on cold, stormy nights, some swore they could see a faint light flickering in the distance, accompanied by the sound of footsteps on creaking wood. Our next Blizzard horror story is Blizzard Cabin Horror. The snowstorm had already begun when Henry's car broke down on the old highway. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally went silent, leaving him alone in the encroaching darkness. The snow fell thick and fast, muting the world around him. He cursed his luck, his car, and himself for choosing this desolate route back home. He stepped out of the car, pulling his jacket tight against the biting wind. Visibility was almost non-existent, the headlights of the dead car barely illuminating the road ahead. Then, just beyond the reach of the fading light, he saw a sign, weathered, leaning, half covered in snow. It read, "St. Helena's Inn, 1 mile." And then, out here. Henry didn't care. It was better than freezing to death. He grabbed his phone, but the screen glared back with no signal. Shoving it into his pocket, he started walking. The wind howled like a living thing, pushing against him as he trudged forward. His boots crunched on the snow, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the storm. The inn came into view suddenly, looming out of the white haze. It was a tall, Victorian-style building, its dark wooden facade contrasting starkly with the snow. Warm light flickered from the windows, beckoning him like a lifeline. He approached the door and knocked. The sound seemed to vanish into the heavy air. After a few moments, he tried the knob. It turned, and the door swung inward with a creak. Inside, the inn was warm, almost too warm. A fire crackled in a massive stone hearth in the center of the lobby, casting flickering shadows on the high, wood-paneled walls. The place smelled faintly of cedar and something sweet, like overripe fruit. It was empty. "Hello," Henry called out. His voice echoed faintly. A woman appeared from behind the front desk, startling him. She was tall, her hair a stark white that matched the storm outside. Her eyes were unsettlingly bright, almost reflective in the firelight. "Welcome to St. Helena's," she said, her voice smooth and calm. "You've come at the perfect time." My car broke down a mile back," Henry explained. "I just need a place to wait out the storm." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, we have plenty of rooms. You're our only guest tonight." Henry hesitated, glancing around. The place had an odd, frozen-in-time quality, like it had been untouched for decades. Still, it was shelter. "Thanks. How much for a room?" "Oh, we don't take payment here," she said, her smile widening. "Consider yourself our guest." That was strange, but Henry was too tired and cold to argue. She handed him an old-fashioned key with a brass tag that read, "Room 7, and gestured toward the staircase. "Breakfast is served at dawn," she said as he climbed the stairs. "Sleep well." The hallway upstairs was dimly lit, lined with doors that all looked identical. Room 7 was at the end. Inside, the room was cozy but dated, with heavy drapes, a four-poster bed, and a worn armchair by the window. A single candle flickered on the bedside table. Henry flopped onto the bed, exhaustion overtaking him. He awoke to a sound, a faint whispering, just outside his door. Groggy, he sat up, his heart pounding. "Hello," he called, but the whispering stopped. He got out of bed and crept to the door, opening it a crack. The hallway was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavier, colder. He shut the door and locked it, an ease prickling at his skin. Back in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The candle flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows on the walls. Then it went out. The darkness was absolute. Henry's breath quickened. He fumbled for his phone, using its faint light to illuminate the room. That's when he saw it, a figure standing in the corner, motionless. It was barely visible, more shadow than substance, but its presence was undeniable. "Who's there?" Henry demanded, his voice trembling. The figure didn't move. He reached for the lamp on the bedside table, but before he could turn it on, the phone's light flickered and died. The air grew colder, each breath visible as a puff of vapor. The silence stretched, oppressive and heavy. Then came the whispering again, this time from everywhere at once. Words he couldn't understand, spoken in a language that felt ancient and wrong. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. Henry's panic reached a breaking point. He bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, almost deafening. The shadow in the corner began to move, gliding toward him with impossible slowness. Henry screamed, pounding on the door. It finally gave way, and he stumbled into the hallway. The inn was different now. The warm, inviting atmosphere was gone, replaced by a cold, suffocating darkness. The fire in the hearth below was out, the lobby shrouded in shadow. The white-haired woman stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale and expressionless. "You can't leave," she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. Henry didn't wait to argue. He ran past her, out into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall, but he didn't care. He ran blindly through the snow, the wind tearing at him. When he looked back, the inn was gone. In its place was a wall of snow and darkness. Henry was found days later, wandering near the highway, frostbitten and delirious. He babbled about whispers, shadows, and an inn that didn't exist. Locals dismissed it as the ramblings of a man driven mad by the storm, but some, those who had heard the legends, knew better. St. Helena's Inn had stood on that road once, long ago, before it burned to the ground with all its guests inside. On stormy nights, they said, it still welcomed travelers, but no one ever left.